The sun rose over the dusty little town of Millos Creek like a spotlight thrown upon a stage where the actors weren't ready to perform, and yet fate had already written their roles. Millos Creek was usually a quiet place, wooden storefronts leaning under years of wind, stray horses tied lazily to posts, and folks who lived simple lives with simple hopes. But on that morning, the entire town felt swollen with tension, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. And at the center of it all stood a girl no older than 19, her hands trembling, her eyes wide but dry because even tears had abandoned her in shock. Her name was Elara Hoggins, the only daughter of a widowed blacksmith and known by everyone as the softest soul in town, gentle, polite, and carrying the kind of kindness that made people trust in goodness again. She had only come into town to buy medicine for her father's worsening cough, but fate had placed 4 wolves in her path. Those wolves were the sons of Jackal Tyren, the most feared man within 100 miles, a rancher with wealth, guns, power, and the arrogance that came with never being told no in his life. His sons had grown into the same shape as their father, cruel eyes, crueler intentions, and the belief that every person in town was a toy put on this earth for their amusement. What happened in the center of town wasn't something the townsfolk would ever forget. They didn't touch her, but they did something almost worse. They humiliated her, surrounded her, dragged her into the middle of the street, shouted filthy accusations, forced her to stand there while they circled her like predators playing with prey. And the entire town watched. The baker froze mid-step. The school teacher stood at the window in horror. A mother pulled her crying child inside. No one moved. No one stopped them. Because stopping the Tyren boys meant making an enemy of Jackal Tyren, and no one in Millos Creek had the courage, or the death wish, to do that. Elara stood there, shaking, refusing to break, refusing to show them fear even as their laughter cut through her like knives. They shoved her basket aside, stomped on the medicine she had bought, and when she tried to leave, they blocked her again and again, mocking her, telling her she should smile for them, telling her she should learn her place, telling her no one would dare defend her. They wanted power. They wanted the town to see they could crush anyone. And for a long, burning moment, they succeeded. When they finally walked away, triumphant and laughing, the townsfolk looked everywhere except at Elara. Shame hung in the air thicker than dust. She picked up her crushed basket with stiff fingers, her face pale but determined, and she walked home alone, her shoulders pulled back with the last bit of pride she had left. But inside her chest, something had shattered so loudly she could feel the pieces cutting her with every breath. When Elara reached the small, crooked house on the edge of town, her father, Raymond Hoggins, looked up from his chair, his face gray with illness but his eyes still sharp with the protective instinct of a man who had already lost too much in life, first his wife, then his health, and now, perhaps, his belief that this world still held justice. Elara didn't want to tell him. She tried to hide the trembling in her voice, tried to smile as she always did. But a father knows the truth before a daughter ever speaks it, and when he saw the crushed basket, when he saw the bruises on her arm, when he saw the way her eyes refused to look into his, something inside him broke too. She finally whispered the story, haltingly, painfully, each word like a weight dragging her down. And Raymond listened in silence, a silence so heavy it felt like the whole world had come to a stop inside their little home. When she finished, she waited for her father to speak, to curse those boys, to hold her, to cry maybe. But he didn't do any of that. He just stood, slowly, carefully, like a man older than he truly was. He walked to the wooden chest at the foot of his bed and pulled out a long bundle wrapped in cloth. Elara's breath caught when she saw what was inside, his old rifle, oiled and maintained even though he hadn't used it in years. She grabbed his arm, begged him not to do anything foolish, pleaded that she didn't want violence, didn't want revenge, didn't want to lose him too. But Raymond gently placed his hand over hers, and the look in his eyes was something she had never seen before, a mixture of love so deep it hurt to breathe, and a resolve so cold it gave her chills. A man can swallow his pride, he said softly, but he cannot allow his daughter to walk this earth thinking she is alone. That night, Raymond didn't sleep. He sat by the window, his rifle resting across his lap, staring out into the darkness as if waiting for dawn to give him permission to act. Elara cried silently in her room, praying he would change his mind, praying that maybe by morning he would forget this anger and find another way. But fathers don't forget the pain carved into their daughters. Dawn broke, red like fire on the horizon, and Raymond rose. He kissed Elara's forehead, something he hadn't done since she was a little girl, and whispered, "Whatever comes next, remember that you are worth fighting for." She clutched his sleeve, sobbing now, begging him one last time. But gently, with a kind firmness, he freed himself from her grip and stepped out of the house. He walked straight toward town with a steadiness that did not belong to a sick man. Word spread quickly. Curtains parted. Doors cracked open. People whispered, afraid, because everyone knew where he was going. Everyone knew what would happen if he confronted the Tyrants. But no one stopped him. The entire town watched as Raymond Hoggins, the humble blacksmith, the quiet widower, walked straight across the town square and toward the large stone building that served as the Tyren family's office, ranch headquarters, and throne of intimidation. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. And when he pushed open those tall wooden doors, the town held its breath. Because at that moment, Raymond was no longer a sick man, no longer a poor man, no longer a quiet man. He was a father whose daughter had been humiliated, and a father with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man of all. And what he chose to do inside that building would change Millos Creek forever. And it would be the beginning of a story that would shake the town to its bones. When Raymond pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the Tyren building, the entire town felt the tremor of that moment, though they stood far outside. Inside, the room was dim, lit by the flicker of a lantern and the sharp morning sun slicing through the blinds. Jackal Tyren sat behind his long desk of polished mahogany, boots up. Cigarette between his fingers, the expression of a man who believed nothing in this world could ever challenge him. His 4 sons, Clay, Morgan, Vince, and Theo, stood scattered around the room, polishing rifles, flipping cards, laughing about something meaningless. But when the door creaked open and Raymond stepped inside, all laughter died instantly. Jackal lowered his cigarette, examining the blacksmith with the cold amusement of a man watching a mouse walk into a lion's den. "Well, if it ain't the hammerman," Jackal drawled. "Come to fix my door. Or maybe polish my boots." The room chuckled, but Raymond didn't move. He stood tall, his rifle steady in his hands, his jaw locked with a strength that no sickness could weaken. "Your sons humiliated my daughter," he said quietly, but the quietness made it even more dangerous. "And today, I'm here to take back her dignity." The Tyren boys stiffened. Jackal smirked, leaning back. "Your daughter needed a lesson. Everyone in this town needs a reminder of who runs it." Raymond took one step closer, and the weight of that step felt like thunder. "This town may bow to you," he said, "but I do not. And she will not." Jackal's smirk faded. A storm gathered in the room. Clay reached for his gun. Morgan took a step forward. Vince cursed under his breath. Theo froze, uncertain. But Raymond, old, sick, trembling slightly from the weight of the rifle he held, did something none of them expected. He placed the rifle gently on the ground and pushed it aside with his foot. The Tyren boys blinked in confusion, and Jackal raised an eyebrow. "You come here without a weapon," he scoffed. "You must be dumber than you look." Raymond shook his head. "I didn't come to kill anyone. I came to give you something you've never had, fear." And then, with slow, deliberate movements, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out 4 silver bullets, placing them one by one on the table before Jackal, each bullet clinking like a bell tolling doom. "These," he said, "represent justice for the 4 of your sons." The boys stiffened. Jackal's nostrils flared. Raymond continued, "I will not kill anyone. But I promise you this, if any one of them ever lays a hand, a word, or even a shadow on my daughter again, one of these will find its mark." The room fell silent. The type of silence that suffocates. For a moment, none of them moved, because none of them expected this kind of declaration, one that wasn't fueled by rage, but by certainty. Jackal stood, slowly, his eyes narrowing into something venomous. "You're threatening my family," he growled. Raymond held his gaze without blinking, without shaking, without fear. "No," he said. "I'm warning you." There was something in his voice, a fire, a truth, a conviction, that cracked through the arrogance of the Tyrants like lightning. Jackal slammed his hand on the table. "You walk into my place, talking big, unarmed. You must think I won't break you right here." The sons started moving toward Raymond, but Jackal lifted a hand, stopping them. He wasn't used to being challenged. He wanted to savor this. He walked around the desk, getting so close to Raymond that their breaths almost touched. "I should crush you," he hissed. Raymond's voice didn't waver. "You already did," he whispered. "But you won't do it again." That was the moment, some said later, That broke something inside Jackal. Because the one thing tyrants cannot stand is the sight of a man who's not afraid of them. Raymond turned his back and walked out of the building without being touched. Not a gunshot, not a punch, not a single finger was laid on him. The town watched in stunned silence as he walked back across the square, rifle in hand, his step steady though his body looked like it was fighting every breath. People whispered, he went alone, he walked out alive, but as he neared his home, his strength began to fade. The sickness that had been eating away at him for months tightened its grip. He collapsed just a few feet from his door, coughing violently, blood on his hands. Elara rushed out, screaming his name, dropping to her knees beside him. He forced a smile, a weak one, but one full of love. "You're safe now," he whispered. She shook her head, tears falling freely. "No, no, Papa, please, stay with me, please," he touched her cheek, wiping a tear with trembling fingers. A father's job is to make sure his child never feels alone in this world. She clutched his hand desperately, but his breath grew shallow, and with one final exhale, gentle, peaceful, Raymond Hoggins, the quiet blacksmith who had lived his whole life without raising a voice at anyone, died in his daughter's arms. And the news spread like wildfire. That the blacksmith had confronted the Tyrants. That he had given them a warning. That he had walked home alive. And that he had died a hero. Even the wind seemed to carry the story. When the Tyren boys walked into town later that day, expecting fear, something else met them instead, silence filled with judgment. The townsfolk did not speak, but their eyes condemned. Their eyes whispered, "You broke a girl. You broke a father. And he stood taller than all of you." For the first time in their violent lives, the Tyren boys felt something like shame. Not enough to change, not yet, but enough to make them hesitate whenever Elara's name came up. And Jackal Tyren. He never forgot the look in Raymond's eyes. He never forgot the 4 bullets. He kept them locked in his desk, and though he never admitted it, he never touched Elara again, never let his sons go near her, never allowed her name to be mentioned in mockery. Because even a tyrant knows when a man has spoken from the edge of death with a truth sharper than any blade. Months later, when Elara walked through town, people treated her differently, not with pity, but with respect. She carried herself with quiet strength, her father's courage living inside her like a second heartbeat. And though she mourned him every day, she also honored him every day, by living unbroken. Millos Creek was never the same after that morning. People began standing up, speaking out, drawing lines they had once been too afraid to draw. One man's bravery had changed the spine of an entire town. And in the small cemetery behind the church, where Raymond was laid to rest beside his wife, Elara placed the 4 silver bullets on his grave, not as symbols of revenge, but as symbols of a promise kept, a love defended, a father's final stand. As the wind blew through the trees, it almost sounded like his voice whispering, "You are worth fighting for." And that message, my friend, is something every heart deserves to hear. If you want more powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these emotional journeys alive and helps us create more gripping tales for you.